Very pleased to introduce Dominik Braun, is going to be talking to us about his work Consolidating Germany's Administrative Communications. You can ask questions afterwards, and please remember, if you're watching on the live stream, you can ask questions there as well. We'll be keeping track. So please join me in welcoming Dominik.
All right. Hello, everyone. Today, I'm going to talk to you about exactly this. We have an initiative going on in Germany to kind of work on our citizen and company communications. So it's about how the government talks to citizens in online public services, in various public service apps, and these kind of things. But before I dive into that, a little bit about myself so that you kind of know who you have in front of you here. I'm Dominik. I am a federal enterprise architecture management officer or something like that at an agency called FITCO, which is the Federal IT Corporation, or Föderale IT Kooperation in German for anyone here who speaks German, which is kind of an interstate agency in Germany because, as you probably know, it's a very federalized state. So we have kind of 16 substates, Bundesländer, and then the federal government, the national government. And they essentially came together to kind of make central decisions on how IT should be implemented in the public administration, in the IT Planning Council. And the IT Planning Council has essentially like an implementation agency, and this is where I work. We do a lot of the central kind of planning around architectures and standards. There's a centralized product management, IT product management department that kind of plans and operates a lot of the IT products in the German public administration. And all of that is kind of happening roughly under the roof of FITCO. At FITCO, I kind of established the framework kind of concept under which we're working. I've worked on the administrative cloud, but mostly for the past 2 years on the topic of government to citizen, but also government to company communications and the underlying infrastructure and how to reform that. And this is exactly what I'm going to talk to you about today. So, essentially, if you have any public service, this is the dilemma you're kind of presented with. If you want to reach your citizens, you can send a physical letter, or, because this option has kind of become more and more outdated, more and more expensive, you can reach them digitally through some kind of online portal, through some kind of communications means. Around this kind of situation, you certainly have certain expectations in user experience, but also certain malpractices. And this is usually what happens in the process. Someone submits some kind of online application to the government. Something comes up in the middle. Maybe the government has some kind of question. They, in the end, have to issue some kind of notice to the citizen. Hey, we have decided the following thing in your case. And some of that communication usually still happens on paper. What we're working on is essentially, from a UX perspective, streamlining this process a little to enable kind of a digital end-to-end process where kind of back and forth communication, kind of also in real time and so on, is possible. This is kind of the user experience perspective of what we're working on. But as I said before, we are actually more of an IT architecture unit. So user experience is highly important, of course, for the success of government services in general. But the second aspect of our problem, so to say, is kind of the diversity of inbox solutions that just exist in the German public administration. Again, as you know, they're a federalized state, not only kind of on the different levels of government, but also in terms of different domains. There's health services and kind of anything legal, like internal affairs, various other kind of social affairs, military, and so on and so forth. And a lot of these different domains over the years have started to build their own solution to the same problem, which is how do I reach kind of the participants of my administrative procedure, which kind of left us with roughly this kind of situation. There are various different inbox solutions that all roughly do the same thing. You receive some kind of message, you can usually reply to it. You can maybe up or download some kind of attachment. Sometimes there are different kind of digital signatures. Most of the user interfaces are a little old or somehow like integrated into some kind of monolithic application that is maybe great in terms of, or for this specific kind of government domain that you're in, maybe taxes. But as a citizen, you ultimately do not know where to expect any kind of digital mail from your government. So from an architectural point of view, this is kind of where we want to head in the future. So not really from a user experience point of view, but really from an like state infrastructure perspective, we want a consolidated kind of mailbox and communications infrastructure that administration, citizens, the justice system, like private organizations, but also like health authorities, schools, etc., can eventually just kind of connect themselves to, and it's a internally coherent infrastructure. As we're on at the Matrix conference here, I guess you probably know where this is heading, but just to kind of outline the general kind of problem area that we're in. So what are our design goals between kind of this user experience and architecture perspective? Most of the motivation we came in with was architectural, honestly. So as you can see, we definitely do want to improve user experience. And I have a colleague here who will have another talk later on, who will go a little more deeply into the specifics of a technical proof of concept we're currently doing, which is a lot more focused on also user experience research and stuff like that. I will tell you a little more or give you a little more of a teaser about that other project a little later on. But from an overarching architectural point of view, what did we want to achieve? Like, one main goal is kind of dismantling barriers to kind of technical connection and use. So various different public agencies on the state level, on the federal level, on the municipal level, have IT systems of various kinds who kind of have to kind of connect their existing systems to various kind of APIs. The more different in-box systems you have, expecting maybe different messaging formats and stuff like that, the more like effort you have to put into like just the act of properly connecting your existing infrastructure, which has nothing to do with messaging, to the appropriate output where citizens should expect their message in this particular context. So a lot of extra work in connecting different systems. Then this is closely related, of course, cost savings and general kind of streamlined operations. The diversity of also different technical foundations between all of these different systems, of course, creates immense overhead. So if you just consider most of these are managed by different organizations, are kind of being developed by different kind of software providers, and that creates a lot of kind of surplus cost for the German state as a whole, which we think can be kind of reduced and streamlined by creating a kind of shared technical basis. Then, of course, and this is kind of the big point, how we eventually arrived at Matrix, end-to-end security, or specifically the end-to-end encryption of the communication, which we, of course, want to achieve for various reasons. One is more like a public security point of view, of course, but the other is also, let's say, a little more of an anti-fascist perspective, where we kind of want to secure communication between a specific agency and the citizen from other parties in the government who might not be entitled to actually view that communication. Then we have the user experience, of course, as I said before, and the general kind of reform of the citizen and company communications infrastructure to a state-of-the-art state, from where we can kind of develop it further and make sure that like 5 years, 10 years down the line, we are still at a point where we are kind of on roughly the right track, technologically speaking, and we do not have even more kind of legacy products, or like invested much more money into legacy products that basically no one besides this specific domain in the German public sector even uses. So yeah, this is kind of the general context where we're coming from and the kind of problems that we're facing. So this consolidated infrastructure that I've been talking about, what kind of requirements does that even need to fulfill? Because, as I will point out in a moment, there are certain kind of also conflicting and hard to fulfill sets of requirements that this kind of citizen communication infrastructure kind of is faced with. To kind of figure that out, we kind of went through a kind of requirements gathering, requirements engineering process. We reviewed all the different solutions that were on the slide before. We talked to a lot of experts related to those solutions, reviewed their documents, gathered about 900 different requirements, which were consolidated down into a shorter list of about 150 requirements, which are all online. I have the link to them on the slides in a minute, so you can take a look for yourself. They're unfortunately in German only, but maybe that's still useful to some of you. And all of that eventually kind of led to kind of how the new target architecture for this to be built infrastructure is or has been designed. And I will go into detail about that in a minute. So yeah, as I said, the requirements list for this consolidated infrastructure that we're proposing is online. You can scan the QR code. It's on the public GitLab that a lot of different German government agencies are using, open code. So it's just publicly available, and feel free to take a look. What I brought with me here now are a few kind of select requirements. It's a little dry, so please excuse that there's quite a bit of text on the next 4 slides or so. I just wanted to point out some of the kind of requirements that we're faced with. So this central infrastructure, or this consolidated infrastructure, should be kind of a single access point for private individuals and organizations. It should allow real-time communication. It should be available on mobile devices, and it should also, and this is unfortunately still a requirement you specifically have to kind of specify, allow communication both ways, because most of these kind of inbox systems, they struggle quite a bit with just replying to the government after kind of the message has been delivered. So from a just kind of use case-based user experience view, this is what should be, this new infrastructure should be able to do. Then if we take a more identity and kind of authenticity-based viewpoint, any messages we send through there should, of course, be legally binding. If a public sector agency publishes a notice to a certain citizen, like, please submit your tax records, or in a month X will happen, you need to do that in kind of a way that can be legally relied on in court. So no one must have any insecurities about, has a message been sent? Has it been received by the other party? What was attached to this message? Who has sent this message? And so on and so forth. Then, of course, while I'm using like any client that is attached to this infrastructure, I always need to be able to see who is the other party that I'm communicating with. Is this in fact my local tax office? Is this in fact my local disease prevention office or whatever? Or is this someone else kind of posing as this public authority? But at the same time, especially for citizens in Germany, we cannot use unique identifiers. So that is prescribed by law. There is no globally unique identifier for German citizens. There are very kind of sophisticated kind of authentication mechanisms based on the EID, which relies on a combination of different factors like the name, the place of residence, and the birth date and the birthplace and so on. But with only one piece of information, you can usually not identify any given citizen. So that, of course, makes the whole thing way more challenging. Then citizens may not be contacted without prior approval. For organization, that looks a little different, but that is also very kind of a valid and important thing to consider in the target architecture. And then we have some kind of partially related to the kind of legal reliability of the communication, like representation rules, power of attorney. Like, what if one citizen should kind of receive communication that is actually for their child or their maybe grandparent who they care for, and so on and so forth. So, not trivial. In terms of openness and connectivity, we have things like, hey, this infrastructure partially needs to exist, or like should exist in the internet. So it should be publicly accessible, because a lot of municipalities, for example, do not even have the access to the same networks as certain national government agencies do. If the servers were in these networks, they probably wouldn't be able to even talk to each other. They should have kind of standardized and open programming interfaces. It should be open standards under open software licenses. and so on and so forth. There should be no proprietary components in this infrastructure, all from a kind of digital sovereignty point of view. So all of this already tall order from a certain perspective, and certainly not requirements that necessarily all of the existing inbox systems fulfill. Then on security and encryption, we want kind of end-to-end encryption, as I said before, but also kind of advanced kind of cryptographic properties like perfect forward security, post-compromise security, and so on and so forth. And then on the other hand, the like cryptographic keys shouldn't be managed manually by the end user. In the German tax system, for example, for the longest time, you had like a certificate file on your PC as just a file, and if you forgot where you saved it and you wanted to submit your tax records the next year and you didn't find the file, like, you're lost, like your account was lost. So somehow please, if anyone is from the German tax service here, you build a very fine kind of application in general, but like this is still something that people struggled with like 10, 15 years ago. So the key handling should be kind of abstracted from and as easy as possible for the end user. And then there are certain kind of requirements that are kind of unique to this specific public sector use case in a federal system. Specifically, resiliency. So we heard before, I think, at some talk that communication in crisis situations, for example, or kind of general resiliencies towards outages, war scenarios, and stuff like that. But on the other hand, also the independence of the different branches of government. So the judiciary should be able to kind of conduct their business and communication towards citizens independently from, for example, the internal administration. And all of these are factors to consider as we kind of designed this new kind of consolidated infrastructure and developed the target architecture for it. So, after bearing with me with all of these slides that had a lot of text, let me show you a bunch of pictures that essentially show what we propose. So, if I say we, I mean, I will explain a little more about that in the end of the talk when I reflect on kind of the policy challenges. There is a federal IT architecture board under the IT Planning Council in Germany. So the institution that I named before, where kind of the different states and the national government come together to kind of structure their IT, has given itself this kind of expert committee whose job it is to kind of design IT architectures and make architecture rules and stuff like that. And this group had a project based on a mandate from the IT Planning Council, collected all of these requirements, and now made a proposal how this architecture, which is, as you have probably gathered by now, based on matrix, or will be based on matrix, should look like. So, first off, what will you see over the next few slides? I have 4 or 5 different views that look roughly like this. In terms of color coding, gray are some kind of application that is usually operated by a third party. The kind of yellowish components are something that is provided kind of from a central perspective, so centrally provided as part of this infrastructure. And there are these kind of small annotations here, ADR 1 to 13. So these are architecture decision records. So if anyone here is kind of an enterprise or IT architect or solution architect or something like that, these are just, you probably know, these are just formalized documents that essentially run through in our kind of IT architecture. We have the following issue, we have the following options to kind of solve this issue. And after kind of considering all the different options of solving a certain kind of design aspect of the architecture, we have decided on the following. And these kind of documents are called architecture decision records. There are, as of now, 13 of them, which describe different aspects of this target architecture. And you will find kind of references to those ADRs in the various graphics. I have also kind of on the slides like abbreviated versions of their content, but please feel free to go online and read the full documents if you're interested. They are unfortunately also only in German, but I'm sure you can find a solution for that in this day and age. Eventually, we might also come around to translating them. So, in general, as I said before, this is a consolidated federal target architecture for these kind of communication systems. So companies, public administration, software providers, and citizens in their various functionalities should all kind of connect through their respective clients, which have, and I will talk about that more in a moment, which have probably integrated SDK that is developed and kind of by a central unit and then provided to the various different parties that want to kind of connect to the infrastructure, which have connected or like integrated that SDK into their software and have then connected to the infrastructure, which kind of is which kind of is a it doesn't seem very impressive for anyone who uses matrix day-to-day, but which has kind of concise and consistent communication channels between all of these parties, which are attached to the infrastructure, which has not been the case so far. So the first ADR essentially specifies this infrastructure is, from an architectural point of view, a basic component. It is agnostic to like a certain subject matter. This doesn't exist, or this wouldn't exist in the tax authority, in the social authorities, etc. But something that is kind of agnostic to the specific kind of domain that we're in. If we then kind of zoom into this kind of yellow circle and look what the infrastructure would look like from the inside, this is essentially where we arrive. You can see a few more annotations here specifying the different ADRs describing the design of the architecture. Internally, it is kind of a hybrid approach. So compared to kind of the public matrix infrastructure, which of course is like full decentralized, we would, in this case here, have kind of a centrally provided node, which would have some kind of primacy, but would also be just a service offer to various kind of public sector authorities or companies who do not want to take on the burden of running their own backend infrastructure. So they essentially would just need to integrate the SDK into their existing infrastructure and their existing tools, and would have a kind of backend to connect to. But in other cases, as I said before, the independence of the judiciary, or maybe just some operational issues, crisis resilience. There are many different reasons why any given public authority or company might decide they would rather operate their own backend, and they would then, under this kind of architecture, be able to kind of federate with the centrally provided node or any other party in the network. They would want to reach as part of the procedure that they're conducting. So if we go a little further, as I said, this is kind of the infrastructure. There is kind of an ADR describing its hybrid nature. It's hybrid nature between centralization and decentralization. If we then head on, there are these two components here, which are yellow colored. And as I said before, these would be provided centrally and kind of have a generic nature. They are described in ADR 5 and 6, if you want to look them up online. So as a native part of the infrastructure, there would be kind of a multi-purpose client that companies or citizens can use to receive and send messages from the state. This is just the default solution. That doesn't mean that there can't be other kind of communication endpoints provided by the state. So, for example, if there ever should be something like a Germany app or something like that, there is the kind of default citizen communication tool solution, which is called Bund ID in Germany. This, of course, would also still be kind of able, or might even be the primary way that citizens send and receive messages. But in the end, the kind of point is there has to be kind of a free and open source way for any party in Germany that has any kind of business with the German government to actually run this client, probably some kind of web app, and have access to this infrastructure as a default way. And in the same mindset, the default backend node should, as I said before, be kind of a service offering to anyone who is unwilling to run their own backend infrastructure. But then we, of course, have the opportunity for anyone who has the desire to do so, to do basically anything that they would also be able to do in the public matrix infrastructure in terms of developing their own components. So if someone wants to kind of build their own client, or someone would rather implement their own server, our architecture would allow that, because we kind of said under the zero trust paradigm, we really didn't see much of a reason to not allow this. This is kind of a deviation from other approaches that we've seen with kind of public sector matrix infrastructures elsewhere, which have a rather kind of extensive vetting and kind of approval processes for any kind of applications that essentially federate with the network. As of now, this is kind of the proposal we made to the IT Planning Council. It might well be that a little further down the line, it turns out that there are valid security concerns or various concerns that we might go back a little on these kind of decisions to be fully open in both kind of operational provisioning and development of front and back end components. But as of now, that was kind of the suggestion we made. However, the plan is to have kind of a standard or reference implementation, especially of the backend component that kind of allows or kind of eases the job of any third party, or be it any mostly kind of various public sector authorities in Germany, to kind of run their own backends and gain some degree of independence and sovereignty kind of within this communications network. Then, if we look at the kind of communication pathway through there, and this is kind of the point why we are here, and which is kind of the main specific decision in this architecture, is the recommendation to use matrix as the communications layer, to essentially connect any citizen and any public institution, any company, with in terms of communication that is a little informal. Let's put it like that, because we have not cut a clear line to kind of separate it from pure machine-to-machine communication, but what we're not proposing to kind of use matrix as kind of a universal machine-to-machine interface. But if you have some kind of receiving party, a human receiving party, or a human sending party, or humans on both ends, this is mostly the use case that we have in mind, and for this kind of we're suggesting matrix as the default communications layer. However, we also suggested or recommended MLS as the kind of encryption layer, which, as we all know, and as we have heard in two different talks today, is not feasible as of now, not integrated as of now, but there are various policies in the German public sector, as well as certain cryptographic properties that kind of led the working group of the architecture board to kind of make that recommendation. So sooner or later, to kind of implement the target architecture in Germany, we definitely would need to also look at the question of how to integrate matrix and MLS. Specifically, the Federal Information Security Agency also has a rule on that, ruling on that especially, what's the term, like high security or kind of prohibited material can only be transferred using MLS. Yeah, and then to kind of jump to the last architecture decision really quickly. When it comes to interoperability with third infrastructures, here we have kind of the EU flag, because we somewhat had the kind of infrastructures in other European countries in mind, but also, of course, legacy infrastructures within Germany. We said that the desired goal would be to have interoperability on the basis of the end-to-end encryption layer. So there should not be a break in the end-to-end encryption. If there's some kind of different data transfer protocol, that would be fine, as long as we do not have to kind of decrypt the payload between the two different ends of the communication, which of course makes bridging into legacy solutions harder. But as of now, this is also kind of the little more hardline suggestion that kind of the architecture board made, and we will see whether it will actually make it into practice. And then from the connectivity perspective, the suggestion is to have kind of a central self-service portal for any kind of any developer resources required to kind of connect public sector applications or company or citizen applications to this infrastructure, which has everything needed for kind of registration and stuff like that, but also software development kits, the full developer documentation, and so on and so forth. This is also somewhat fragmented right now, so a lot of these this landscape of solutions that I showed initially doesn't have public documentation at all. Or if they have public documentation, it's kind of mediocre quality. And for those who even have like good quality and self-service portals, there are multiple of those. So one suggestion is definitely to kind of consolidate all the self-serving portals for this infrastructure and to provide SDKs with as much functionality as possible to ease the integration of IT systems with this infrastructure, which of course would be kind of derived or mostly consist of the Matrix SDKs that we see today, or like further state of development of those. Yeah, so there's another list or summarization of all the ADRs again, but I won't go through there. So much for the kind of general target architecture that we propose. This might be a little dry and boring, but I want to remind you this is kind of the general policy level where state secretaries and basically the highest level of administrative decision makers, which are essentially working just under our country's kind of top politicians, come together to kind of agree on where to head generally. And this, or getting here, was actually quite an achievement in terms of both consolidating a quite diverse existing brownfield of kind of legacy applications, but also having Matrix as a specific existing open protocol that we can kind of suggest and promote that already kind of solves a lot of these different issues. And I think I'm kind of unfortunately running out of time a little, so I can't really go deeply into the kind of policy process, but if you're very kind of interested how we got there, it was a multi-step thing where we kind of had to initially kind of validate the hypothesis, yeah, Matrix is suitable. We even have to act and consolidate kind of these various different inbox solutions. And then through a very meandering kind of path, eventually come to the, on a working level, to the decision, yes, Matrix is actually quite suitable for this and has kind of natively fulfilled quite a few of the requirements and kind of design requirements that we have for the target architecture. And eventually, last summer, the IT Planning Council kind of accepted this proposal. Strictly speaking, there's still kind of tiny loopholes, and they could, of course, always go back on what they decided. But it looks quite optimistic so far that we will head into the implementation of this target architecture based on Matrix. So what will happen next? We are now starting the second phase, which is called transition planning and validation. So over the next few months, probably until next summer, we are getting together with the kind of teams responsible for all of these different existing and legacy applications. And with every one of them, we are essentially agreeing on a transition or migration roadmap, what needs to kind of change in their solutions to kind of get to all this target state that I outlined overall, but then also a bunch of other work, mostly like setting up a governance system, how making decisions on how will this be financed, who's paying for what, and so on and so forth. So all of that will be happening over the next half year or so, maybe a little longer if we don't come to a point soon enough, and then probably from like somewhere in the middle of the next year to a little further down the line, the actual technical migration will start, and we will start to actually make changes in the code bases of the existing products. So I will not go through the various different work packages here, but I will kind of point you towards kind of the second part of the puzzle here, because as you kind of remember in the beginning, I said we have a technical proof of concept, technical pilot project currently running, where we are developing an app, a web app, and a server, all based on Matrix. Maybe there are even some people in the room here who are kind of working on that project. And a colleague of mine will have a talk a little later on. This project is kind of internally called NEO, and it mostly looks at this kind of line of communication here between public administration bodies and citizens. So we're kind of working closely with the national government there on one of their IT solutions, kind of the system behind the Bund ID. Yeah, this is internally called Neo. Formally speaking, it's called like matrix-based follow-up communication for administrative procedures or something like that. And of course, we're hoping for a lot of positive feedback and kind of insights from this technical POC that kind of can feed back into the overall kind of target architecture then. So yeah, just as a little look on the timeline for today, we're in this slot over here, and a little later on at 5:10 this afternoon, there will be the second talk by Network Exception, my colleague over there. I think it's also going to be in the same room. Yeah, that looks like it's going to be in the same room. So if you're interested, please be back here at 5:10 later on. And if you want to kind of connect to me, this is my Matrix handle, this is also my LinkedIn. Yeah, if you're interested, please reach out or kind of catch me later on here at the conference.
Super. Thank you very much, Dominik. Are there any questions from the room? We have one from the chat, but I'm happy to take questions from here first of all. Yeah, here we go.
I have a question regarding the legally binding. As far as I know, email is treated like regular mail legally, while chat messengers in general are not. So is this system supposed to be treated like mail?
As in physical mail?
Yeah.
So in principle, yes. So there are a bunch of different perspectives that we can look at this problem from, because functionally speaking, email has been considered like mostly equivalent to mail, but also like cryptographically it isn't really. Like there are a bunch of different things that can go wrong with emails, and there is also an initiative on the European level with these kind of qualified signatures and stuff like that. So there are additional mechanisms that we're looking at to make the authenticity of messages themselves, but also the various different timestamps even more reliable from like a technical point of view. But then the second question is, of course, how will courts and different agencies adapt their kind of viewpoint based on that? Is it actually important for them, or is it just enough that a certain kind of message showed up in their inbox and then the personnel isn't even kind of able or willing to kind of validate certain keys or something like that? So I think there's a social component to that, there's a kind of legal component to it, and then there's a technical component. And kind of the point that we mostly have in view is this kind of how can we technically and cryptographically kind of make a step ahead and kind of support this authenticity, the legal and the social aspect of what is considered like a proper message from or to a certain administrative body that is a little out of scope for now.
So when you said legally binding, you mean on a technical level, not really on a legal level?
Yeah, like legally speaking, there are also different opinions. Like we are, like one of the things that we will do is, we will kind of have, or we are currently working with a specialized with specialized lawyers to kind of make assessments on various different aspects of this target architecture, but there are a bunch of legal questions on different levels. So we're kind of starting from a constitutional point of view and kind of have to confirm, like, can we actually do this? Are there any like baseline reasons not to build this infrastructure? And then we will kind of slowly dive deeper into more specific questions. And one will definitely be like, at what point or what kind of technical features does this kind of cryptographic signature on different messages and timestamps have to fulfill kind of legal requirements? And it's partially an open question also because there are different opinions. Yeah.
Hello, thank you. Thank you for the talk. I had one question. You mentioned, you emphasized on the user experience.
Mm-hmm.
I was wondering, as Matrix is end-to-end encrypted, it puts lots of focus on that. How will you ease the encryption keys towards the final user of the solution? What has been analyzed on that aspect?
Yeah, there are different ideas for that, and we haven't fully settled on one solution yet. I think like the technical specificities of that might be better placed in the second talk this afternoon, because I think there my colleague can actually go into a little more detail about the various ideas that are also being tried. Generally speaking, we consider kind of client-side solutions. We considered maybe kind of storing keys under, like encrypted keys under certain conditions on maybe the centralized server, or like, but we're not quite sure yet. It is a tight rope to walk generally, because it is the worst possible user experience if kind of a citizen loses access to all the messages they got from the state, and the state tells them, well, kind of your fault. We cannot really reproduce this. A legal solution would be to just mandate the different public authorities to kind of keep copies of whatever they sent to the citizen, and kind of mostly place kind of everything surrounding the transmission procedure, like the timestamps and the legal fact whether a certain message was received in the communications infrastructure, but all the kind of domain specific content, what the administration actually decided and when, still has to be kind of stored with the agency. So even if an account is lost or access to certain messages, every public authority would still be kind of required to reproduce their decisions and their decision-making process if required. So this is not this wouldn't make kind of a matrix-based solution into like a general purpose data store for the public administration, where like the responsibility of storing the message content is fully moved into the infrastructure and away from the specific agency. But we're kind of figuring out the specifics. Maybe it's also a mix of different measures in the end.
Thank you, Dominik. We're a little bit over, but there's one more question that I thought was interesting. You touched on it a bit, but maybe we can give another comment.
Yeah.
People already have, as you know, Federation is already existing.
Yeah.
People already have their existing matrix and email accounts. Is there a way that they can connect with this system with their existing?
We discussed that.
Okay.
So we're not sure yet. In a fantasy world, and initially in our first drafts, we were like, yeah, sure, why not? There might be a technical solution for that, and to make it kind of mostly secure in the same sense as people might be able to use their private email to kind of get notifications. It would also kind of solve the problem a little of like not having central identifiers for citizens, but also it would have certain downsides. In the end, we are not quite sure yet. But it's a point that has been considered.
Okay, thank you very much. Again, one more question.
Yeah, sure.
I think we have a moment.
As long as we have time.
We're talking a lot about end-to-end encryption.
Yeah.
And I was wondering what the end is. I mean, in a classical world, user A, user B, both ends. In this world, I can imagine one end is a citizen. But what would be the other end?
Yeah.
An employee, a functional thing, an agency?
That is a very good and also kind of tough question, and this is also why kind of there are these dotted lines around kind of the endpoints, because on the citizen side it should actually be the citizen. So if it's an application on your phone, it's end-to-end encryption in the sense as you would have with any kind of matrix client. On the other side, there are certain practicalities to consider, like a public agency cannot be impossible, it can't be impossible to work on a certain case if a certain caseworker is out sick, just because kind of the endpoint of the communication was the specific caseworker. It would also kind of rearrange various different processes all under this kind of umbrella of requiring end-to-end encryption. So functionally speaking, it is somewhere in the kind of domain of power of the agency that is legally responsible. And we're kind of encouraging them to put it as close as possible to the actual workstation that the caseworker is working on. But at some point, of course, like this is a legal person and not like a specific natural person. And at some point, they will need to be they will have to kind of decrypt the message and actually work on its contents. And at that point, it's just general IT security on the end of the like this administrative body, and it's their responsibility to keep the content safe. Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay, so last chance. Otherwise, I'll say thank you very much, Dominik.
Yeah,
Thanks
sure.
for introducing us. Thank you.